Welcome to HistQuest, a quiet journey into the world of the Middle Ages. Tonight, we step into the frozen heart of winter, a season both feared and respected. We'll explore how medieval villagers endured the cold, how they warmed their homes, tended their fires, protected their families, and found hope in the darkest months of the year. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps me create more historical stories. Let's begin. The Frost Keeper's Chronicle Act I. The coming of the frost. Old woman felt the frost long before anyone else in the village dared name it. There were signs, subtle ones, the kind only those who had lived through 40 winters could read. Before the sun had fully risen, while the world was still steeped in a blue-grey hush, she stepped outside her cottage and pressed her fingers into the soil near the threshold. The earth did not yield. It had already hardened into something brittle, locked beneath a fragile skin of ice. A faint crunch sounded as she shifted her weight. Frost had crept over the packed dirt of the path during the night, lacing it with a thin crust that glimmered beneath the weak morning light. The wind carried the metallic scent of cold, sharp, unkind, unsoftened by sunlight. It slipped through the village like a warning. Beyond the far fields, crows wheeled in slow, deliberate circles, their cries hoarse and impatient. Even the birds felt it. The migrations had begun earlier than usual. Skeins of geese had passed over the village days before, honking as though in farewell. The elder Mara, though most called her grandmother Frost for the way she could sense winter's breath, watched the sky with narrowed eyes. She did not fear winter, but she respected the terrible authority it held. Behind her, the village was waking. Doors creaked open. Smoke, thin and hesitant, began to curl from the thatched roofs. Someone struck flint against steel once, twice, then the soft bloom of sparks. A baby wailed from a distant cottage, its cry muffled by wool curtains hung thick across the doorway. The smell of damp wool, earth floors, and faint wood smoke seeped into the air as families emerged to face the morning's cold bite. "Another hard one," muttered Tomas, a broad-shouldered farmer who passed Mara on his way to the fields. Frost clung to his beard like pale dust. He offered her a respectful nod. "The ground freezes too early," Mara replied quietly. "You must pull what's left of the turnips today. No later. Tomorrow they'll be trapped under iron." He grunted agreement. He knew better than to doubt her. Soon, the village hummed with the frantic rhythm of preparation. The final harvest began at once. Men and women knelt in fields where the soil had turned stiff, prying out the last stubborn roots with chilled fingers. The sound of metal spades striking frozen earth rang out hard, metallic, jarring. Breath steamed in white plumes that vanished quickly in the cutting air. Children ran back and forth carrying baskets, their cheeks raw from the wind. Their boots crunched through the frost-covered grass, each step echoing in the cold stillness. Dogs trotted alongside them, noses low, sniffing at the frozen clumps of soil and pawing at the stiff ground in confusion. Near the edge of the settlement, Mara supervised the stacking of firewood. She inspected each log, feeling its weight, tapping it to judge dryness. A hollow sound meant it was seasoned well. A dull thud signaled trouble. The scent of split pine and oak filled the air as axes bit into wood. Each swing was followed by a sharp crack that reverberated against the cottage walls. "Do not stack them so close to the ground," Mara said to a young man who was rushing the work. "The damp will rot them. Raise them on stones like this." She knelt, ignoring the cold numbing her joints, and rearranged the bottom row with practiced hands. The young man swallowed his impatience. No one wished to cross words with the elder when the frost was coming. Throughout the day, the tasks multiplied. Women stuffed moss and straw into the cracks of their timber walls. The soft rustle of straw, the gritty scent of dried grass, the prickling dust of old moss filled the air. Some took leftover sheep's wool, dirty, lanolin rich, still smelling faintly of the animals, and pressed it into smaller gaps around windows and doors. The wool would trap heat better than straw alone. Inside Mara's cottage, her daughter-in-law stretched a sheet of linen, patched and repatched across seasons. Over the window frame, she nailed it down with small pegs of carved bone. As she worked, the fabric billowed gently with each draft, whispering like a ghost caught between two worlds. Mara tied tan deerskin over her doorway. The hide was stiff and cold, but it stopped the worst of the wind. Roofs were checked and repaired. Men climbed ladders to add fresh bundles of thatch, their fingers stiff as they worked the reeds into place. Frozen thatch crackled softly as they stepped on it. Others reinforced wooden beams that had begun to loosen from last spring's storms. The faint creak of rope and timber mingled with the moan of the rising wind. By midday, the livestock were brought into the shared byres attached to the living quarters. The villagers opened wide wooden doors, and animals filed in, cows with warm breaths puffing into the air, goats bleating nervously, chickens clucking in protest as they were gathered. Their smell earthy, pungent, warm mixed with the scent of straw bedding. For many, this mingled scent brought comfort. The animal's body heat would be precious during the coldest nights. The interior world began to shrink even before the snow arrived. As the sun dipped low pale, distant, offering little warmth, the village braced itself. Smoke rose steadily now, thicker than before, curling in slow spirals. The smell of burning pine resin clung to hair and clothing. Children wrapped in rough wool cloaks huddled near the hearths, their noses red, their fingers tucked deep into sleeves. Mara sat by her fire, sharpening one of her flints. Each scrape of stone against steel made a dry, sparking note. The flickering flames cast shifting shadows across the low ceiling beams, revealing the soot that had collected there through many winters. She felt the cold seeping in from the earthen floor, rising through her bones, and placed a loaf-sized stone with the fire to warm. Later, wrapped in cloth, it would be placed beneath the bed covers to stave off the worst of the night's chill. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the wooden shutters. The first flakes of snow drifted down, silent, steady, inevitable. Tomas came to Morel's door, brushing white spakes from his shoulders. "The first fall," he said quietly. She nodded. "The frost has come to claim its place." A hush spread over the village. If every soul felt the shift. Fires were stoked higher. Doors were barred. The world outside grew pale, blurred by the curtain of snow. The smell of burning wood grew stronger, mixing with the faint tang of fear that had no scent yet lived in the stomachs of all. Night settled early. The sky closed in. From within her thick wool shawl, Mara watched the snow gather on the threshold, layer by layer, an indifferent veil laid over the land. "The beginning," she murmured. And in the silence that followed, broken only by the soft pop of resin in the hearth, the village understood one thing. Winter had arrived, and it would not show mercy. Act 2. The siege of cold, first true night of winter, did not arrive with a roar, but with a slow, suffocating tightening, like a fist closing around the village. By dawn, snow had buried the paths leading between the cottages, smoothing the world into a pale, unbroken sheet. When the villagers pushed open their doors in the morning, the wood groaned as if protesting the cold. A wave of frigid air rolled inside, biting at exposed skin with sharp, invisible teeth. Inside Morel's cottage, the hearth fire had burned low, leaving only a bed of sullen embers. Their glow was faint, but it was enough. Enough to coax back into flame, enough to keep death at bay. Mara leaned close, her breath clouding before her face, and studied the embers as one might study a child, firmly, but with tenderness. "Fetch me the tinder," she murmured. Her granddaughter, Lysa, brought a small wooden box carved with runes so old no one remembered their full meaning. Mara opened it carefully. Inside lay thin curls of birch bark, dried grass, slivers of pitch pine, and, most precious of all, a scrap of tinder fungus, brown, leathery, harvested from a birch trunk in early autumn. It smelled faintly of damp earth even after months of drying. Mara placed the tinder fungus atop the embers and blew softly. A faint tendril of smoke twisted upward. Again, a third, steady breath. The fungus darkened, smoldered, caught a spark. A glow pulsed like a slow heartbeat. With the practiced rhythm of a lifetime, Mara fed it the birch curls. Flames unfurled, weak, wavering, but real. The day's first victory. The hearth awakened with a series of sharp snaps, as sap within the logs burst. The firelight licked the soot-streaked walls, pushing back the cold by inches rather than strides. The air smelled of resin, charred wood, and faintly of goat, for the byre door remained open, just enough for the animal's body heat to seep through. Lysa edged nearer, hands stretched out. "It's so cold, grandmother." Mara didn't answer. Instead, she wrapped an old wool shawl around the girl's shoulders, the cloth thick, scratchy, heavy with the scent of lanolin and years of smoke, and guided her to sit closer. In the cramped cottage, warmth was a hierarchy. Elders and children first, the sick, if any, appeared, then the able-bodied adults, who could better endure the cold's teeth. Those closest to the fire rotated often, giving others a chance to thaw their blue-tinged fingers. Outside, the wind howled against the shutters, long, drawn-out moans like some ancient creature prowling the frozen fields. The wooden beams groaned with each gust. Snow hissed as it scraped across the roof. It felt, truly, like a siege. The entire village was now confined indoors, except for the most urgent tasks: gathering snow for water, checking livestock, shaking loose snow from the thatch before its weight collapsed sections of roof. Men moved like ghosts between the cottages, wrapped in layer upon layer linen, wool, hide. Their breath was a constant fog. Their footsteps crunched with a sound that echoed between the walls. Inside, life shrank to a circle around the central hearth. Mara watched the fire with reverence. Fire was not merely warmth. It was the village's beating heart. Without it, all would perish. To let it die was unthinkable, a failure bordering on sacrilege. Every home had someone designated to keep it alive through the long night hours. In Mara's house, she bore that responsibility. Her fingers knew the shape of every tool: the flint, worn thin by years of striking; the steel, smooth from handling; the charred wooden tongs; the iron poker, cold as a frozen stream when first taken up each morning. Each night, she prepared the banked fire, tucking the embers under ash to preserve their heat. Even in sleep, she listened for the slightest change in crackle or scent. Waking to a cold hearth meant panic, tears, frantic blows of flint on steel, until sparks flew like stars. The hearth crackled as she added a log. The warmth spread slowly, seeping into the packed earth floor, rising through the layers of woven mats. The smoke rose toward the small hole in the ceiling, curling, drifting, hesitating before slipping out into the grey sky. Today's chores were done near the fire. Lysa spun wool with stiff fingers, the spindle whirring unevenly. Mara's daughter-in-law sat mending a torn cloak, her breath forming small white clouds each time she leaned away from the flames. From the byre door came the low, steady breathing of the cow, warm, grassy, alive. A goat shifted in the straw, bells on its collar giving a soft metallic chime. Chickens murmured drowsily from a corner where they huddled for warmth. Their presence, though not pleasant-smelling, provided comfort. They were part of the household now. Winter allowed no division between human and beast. As the daylight dimmed what little daylight winter allowed, the sounds of the storm thickened. Snow thudded against the door. Wind roared like a great lung, breathing in and out. Shadows stretched long across the floor, trembling with the dance of the flames. To keep spirits from sinking. The stories began. "Tell us about the Frostkeeper," Lysa whispered, leaning against Mara's knee. Mara did not smile, but the lines around her eyes softened. "The Frostkeeper walks the winter fields," she began, voice low and steady. "He carries the cold in his cloak and scatters it across the land. If he presses his hand to a door, the wood freezes. If he breathes on a stream, the water turns to stone." Lysa shivered, not from fear, but from design. Stories had to be cold, to match the world outside. "But he respects those who honor the fire," Mara continued. "Where the hearth is tended well, he passes without entering." Her daughter-in-law listened too, sewing paused in her hands. For those stories were for the young. They were also for the weary, and everyone in the cottage felt the weight of the storm. Hours stretched like wool pulled thin on a spindle. The fire burned steadily. Snow piled against the walls, muffling all sound. The world beyond the cottage became distant, unreal, as though separated by miles rather than steps. Only once did Mara step outside, wrapped in fur-lined wool, crouched low against the wind's fury to brush snow from the roof. The night sky was invisible behind a sheet of white. The cold stung her face like 1,000 needles. Ice coated the iron latch of the door. Her fingers burned as she pulled it free. She returned inside quickly, stamping snow from her boots. Her cloak smelled sharply of winter-crushed ice, wind, and the faint metallic scent of deep cold. The fire welcomed her with a warm exhale, as though embracing her back into the living world. When night deepened, the family gathered their bedding close to the hearth. The straw mattresses rustled as they settled. Thick woolen blankets, heavy as earth, were drawn tight. Heated stones wrapped in cloth were placed at their feet. The fire was banked once more. Its heart beat slow and steady beneath the ash. Sleep, Mara whispered, but she remained awake, keeping silent vigil. Beyond the walls, winter pressed in from all sides. Within them, the fire stood as the last fragile barrier between life and the endless cold. Act 3. The dark middle of winter arrived, without a single day to mark its boundary. It came not as a moment, but as a deepening and oppressive weight settling over the village like a second sky of ice. The nights grew so long they seemed to swallow the daylight whole, leaving only a pale smear of sun that skimmed the horizon before retreating again. Inside Mara's cottage, time blurred into a rhythm of breath, crackling fire, and muffled storm whines. Each morning began the same, the cold striking like a blow as soon as someone shifted from beneath their blankets. Frost clung to the inside of the window linen, delicate and cruel. The earthen floor felt like stone underfoot. Even the air seemed thick, as though the cold had turned it into something that needed to be chewed to be breathed. Food supplies dwindled steadily. The baskets of turnips and carrots no longer felt abundant. Each root was touched with the same reverence given to coins of gold. Dried beans rattled softly in their clay jar, their number shrinking each day. The smoked meat hanging from the rafters was carefully rationed. A strip added to a pot of broth transformed thin water into something almost rich. Hunger became a quiet companion, never demanding, yet always present. One morning, Mara found the youngest goat shivering violently in the byre. Its breath came in short, wet bursts. When she placed her hand on its side, she felt the telltale chill and inner cold no fire could easily chase away. She called to Tomas, who arrived quickly, eyes somber even before he knelt. The goat did not see another sunrise. Its body, already stiff, was taken outside and buried beneath a layer of snow and earth, the grave marked by a single branch. The loss was small in the vast ledger of winter, yet it carved a hollow place in the villager spirits. If the cold could claim an animal protected within shared walls, what hope had the frailer among them? Inside the cottage, Lysa sniffled quietly. Mara placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We give thanks for what it gave us," she said. "Warmth when it lived, nourishment now." Lysa nodded, though her eyes were red. Death was no stranger in winter, but the closeness of it, the way it slipped silently into the byre made it harder to bear. Illness followed soon after, not a fever, but a deep, rattling cough that traveled from cottage to cottage. The cold made lungs brittle. The smoke from constantly burning fires thickened the air until breathing felt like drawing soot into the chest. Children coughed at night, their small bodies curling inward with each bark. Adults tried to hide their own symptoms so as not to frighten the young. Mara brewed infusions of dried mint, willow bark, and elderflower. The herbs filled the cottage with sharp, comforting scents, though they were no miracle cure. Still, the warm steam helped loosen the tightness in chests. Each night, families huddled closer, breathing shared warmth, listening to the fire's low murmur and the wheezing breaths of the sick. The psychological toll deepened, like a well. Night stretched endlessly. Shadows moved with the uncertain light of the hearth, sometimes twisting into shapes that looked almost human. The wind's cries took on the tone of distant voices. The creaking of timbers sounded like footsteps where none existed. Lysa sometimes woke trembling, convinced she had heard someone outside the door. Though snowdrifts reached nearly to the lintel, winter frightens the mind as much as the body, Mara whispered when the girl sought comfort. It makes the familiar strange. The isolation weighed heavily too. Weeks passed without a clear sky. The world outside remained a blurred, white void, featureless and indifferent. Even Tomas, who was sturdy as an oak trunk, seemed worn thin. His jokes faded. His eyes grew dimmer. He spent long hours staring at the fire, jaw tight, hands clenching and unclenching around nothing. To survive winter was to fight the cold outside and the despair within. Practical measures became rituals, layering clothing until movement grew stiff, placing heated stones at the foot of each bed, sleeping in communal piles, back to back, so body heat pooled like water in a bowl, rising every few hours to feed the fire. Even when exhaustion begged for rest, the air inside smelled constantly of smoke, thick, gritty, sometimes so dense it stung the eyes. The smell of damp wool clung to everything. Sweat, unable to evaporate in the cold, soaked into clothing, giving the cottage a persistent, human musk. Yet amid the weariness, humans sought a spark of meaning, and so Mara gathered the others for the winter solstice. It was not a celebration, nothing so bright, but a quiet ritual of entrance. At dusk, while the wind shrieked outside and snow pressed against the walls, the family placed a special log on the fire. It was a thick piece of oak saved since autumn, carved with simple runes. Lysa traced them with reverent fingers. The log was not magic, not in the way legends spoke, but tradition gave it weight. Mara placed it carefully onto the embers, and the flames embraced it with a slow, deliberate hiss. "We burn this to call back the sun," she said. "Tonight, the year turns. The days will grow longer, though we will not feel it yet, but the light will return." They sat together around the fire. No stories tonight, only silence, broken by the crackle of the Yule log and the low breathing of animals in the byre. The firelight flickered across their faces, tired, hollowed, yet steady. When the log finally split down the middle with a sharp crack, Lysa inhaled sharply. "The sun wakes," Mara whispered. For the first time in weeks, hope frail, trembling, but real moved through the room a breath of warm air. But hope did not mean relief. The days that followed were the harshest yet. The cold deepened until frost formed on the iron hinges indoors. Breath lingered in the air long after exhalation. The world seemed held in a grip made of iron, an ancient, unyielding will. Food dwindled further. Tempers shortened. Even laughter, when it came, felt brittle, quick to fracture under the weight of the season. Yet still, they endured. Fire after fire, night after night, breath after breath. And though the darkness was vast and merciless, the tiny ember of the village, its people, its animals, its fragile hearths burned stubbornly against it. Mara kept watch each night, listening to the wind, to the fire, to the thin, patient hum of life refusing to be extinguished. This was winter's deepest cruelty, and its deepest test. Act 4. The first signs of thawed world began to change imperceptibly at first, as all profound changes do. Mara noticed it one morning, while tending the hearth, a thin drip. Then another, faint and musical, from the eaves above the door. The snow, long a rigid wall around the village, had begun to soften, letting water slip past its frozen grip. Each drop fell onto the hardened earth below, with a metallic plink, a sound that was almost joyful, though tinged with the caution of months spent in vigilance outside. The air carried a new note, damp, earthy, scented faintly of moss and thawing clay. It was a smell both sweet and raw, promising renewal, but reminding all that winter had left its mark. Mara opened the door, stiff from the cold, and stepped onto the threshold. Her boots sank slightly into softened snow, the crunch muted beneath the dampened layer. Her eyes narrowed against the weak sun, now lingering just a little longer over the horizon, casting a soft, silvery glow across the village. Cautious movements marked the villagers' first tentative ventures beyond their cottages. Tomas emerged, wool cloak wrapped tightly around him, and surveyed the yard. The livestock, restless after weeks confined, pawed at softened earth, their breath misting in the cool air. Chickens clucked more energetically, stepping over puddles formed by dripping icicles. The sound of thaw was everywhere, the gurgle of melting ice, the faint trickle of water through channels dug hastily last autumn, the soft thud of melting snow sliding from roofs. Mara followed slowly, her joints still stiff from months of near-constant confinement. She inspected the thatched roofs first, her fingers tracing the cold reeds, now slick with water, noting sagging spots where winter's weight had pressed too heavily. One by one, the cottages revealed their losses, a collapsed section here, a roof beam split under snow's pressure there. Some homes had fared better than others. Some bore the grim reminder of frost and neglect. Inside, the cupboards were checked with equal care. Supplies that had survived were celebrated quietly. A small stash of preserved turnips, a few root vegetables hidden in the straw, grains that had remained dry. Mara counted each ration, noting in her mind what could be spared, what must be eaten immediately. Some houses were emptier than hoped, a reminder that not all had survived the cruel months. There was grief in every glance, a silent acknowledgement of absence of neighbors gone, animals lost, even family members whose bodies had succumbed to illness or exposure. Still, the work of renewal began. Paths were cleared first, snow and ice heaped carefully to create walkable channels. Water was channeled from melting drifts to prevent flooding of the houses and byres. Puddles were scooped and diverted. CHAN and ELS repaired. Doors and shutters, warped by frost, were nudged back into place, hammered and wedged with care. The smell of damp would mingled with the lingering smoke from chimneys, giving the village a renewed, earthy aroma. Inside, the cottages were aired, windows propped open to let in the first flush of spring air, though it carried its own sharp chill. Straw bedding, soaked and flattened, was pulled out and laid in the sun, where possible, to dry. Woolen blankets, stiff with months of smoke and sweat, were shaken and hung on lines. The pungent, oppressive odors of winter, the mingled smoke, animal musk, and unwashed bodies began to dissipate slowly, replaced with the subtle scent of wet earth and the faintly sweet aroma of sun-warmed wool. Children, cautious but eager, crept outside more frequently. Their cheeks glowed with pink warmth, their laughter a fragile, bright thing after months of muffled living indoors. Mara watched them from the threshold, seated on a low step, her hands cupped around a cup of warming broth. The fire, still vital, now shared its hearth with a broader purpose, cooking the first meals that would mark a gentle return to normalcy, rather than merely preserving life. The livestock were led outside in small groups, tentative steps over slushy ground, hooves sinking into the thawing soil. The cows breathed heavily, their warm exhalations mixing with the morning mist. Goats leapt awkwardly, unaccustomed to open space. The chickens pecked greedily at the muddy earth, stirring up tiny, pungent clouds of frost-laden soil. Even as the thaw brought hope, Mara remained watchful. The winter's cruelty had not been fully spent. Ice still clung to the riverbank. Sudden frosts could yet return. Each footfall outside required care, for hidden patches of ice could betray the unwary. But the village was alive again, moving cautiously into light, into sound, into life beyond the hearth. At dusk, Mara sat on the low step outside her cottage, wrapped in a thick shawl. She traced the patterns of meltwater winding across the yard, the small rivulets converging toward the village stream. Snow glistened faintly, no longer a solid wall, but a fading, glittering memory. Her eyes followed a flock of returning birds, their wings slicing through the pale sky. The first blackbirds had arrived. Their calls, soft and uncertain, were like tentative prayers. The villagers gathered in small groups to share news and assess losses. Tamar spoke in low tones with neighbors, recounting the state of their roofs, the status of grain stores, the condition of animals. Mara watched, understanding the weight of these conversations. Survival was not over. It was merely changing form. The battle had shifted from the raw, daily fight against cold to the steady work of repair, tending, and remembrance. By nightfall, fires were stoked once again, though less urgently than before. The rhythm of life shifted subtly, work punctuated by rest, by measured meals, by quiet conversations. Sleep became less a desperate necessity and more a restoration. Though the memory of winter's grip lingered in every stiff joint and tired eye, Mara sipped her broth slowly, tasting warmth and life in every drop. She glanced toward the children playing near the softening snowdrifts, their laughter light, tentative, fragile. and she realized, with a sigh both weary and relieved, that the frost had begun to loosen its hold. The first signs of spring were not triumphant or loud. They were small, tentative, cautious. A drip, a thaw, a warmed breeze, a returning bird. Yet to Mara, and to all who had survived the long siege of cold, they were miracles. Life, fragile and enduring, had returned. Act 5. The rebirth of the Landspring did not arrive with sudden triumph. It came quietly, with the subtle insistence of patience and time. Mara noticed it first, while sitting by the hearth one morning, the sun filtering in through a half-cleared window. The warmth on her hands was soft, gentle, a far cry from the harsh bite of winter. Outside, the snow had retreated almost entirely, leaving behind a patchwork of wet earth, tender shoots, and the dark, glistening mud of thawed fields. The village had begun to stir differently. Children ran freely, their boots leaving muddied trails, their laughter spilling over the cottages. The sound was crisp, light, and strange after the months of muffled indoor life. The air smelled of renewal, wet soil, moss, the faint tang of river water, now freed from its frozen prison, and the earthy perfume of animals, returned to open pastures. Mara rose from her step and walked slowly through the yard. She observed the small shoots of green breaking through the soil, brave and delicate, their presence a testament to survival. The stream, long trapped beneath ice, gurgled and burbled as if laughing at the frost that had sought to bind it. Birds returned, small and hesitant at first, then with louder calls, reclaiming the air once still with winter silence. The blackbirds were joined by larks and sparrows, their wings catching sunlight, filling the village with movement and music. The work of recovery began in earnest. Tomas led teams to the fields, where soil was still heavy with water. They scraped away debris, repaired fences, and leveled the land, preparing it for sowing. Tools, bent or broken during the winter, were straightened, sharpened, or replaced. Mara watched the labor with a sense of satisfaction tempered by memory. The months of confinement, of frost and hunger, were not easily forgotten. The land demanded respect, and the villagers gave it, tenderly and patiently, as if each stroke of the hoe or swing of the mallet were both penance and praise. The livestock, once confined to byres, were led outside in small, orderly groups. Their hooves sank into the softening ground, sending up tufts of rich, dark soil. Cows lowed, goats bleated, and leapt with renewed energy. Chickens scattered to peck at newly exposed worms and seeds. The smell of animals mingled with the sweetening scent of sun-warmed straw, cleansing the air that had been thick with smoke and damp for so long. Within the cottages, the change was equally profound. Winter's insulation straw, moss, and wool was carefully removed. Floors were swept and scrubbed, bedding aired and fluffed. The blackened soot from months of burning wood was scraped from the hearths. The chimney flues cleared. Windows were propped open to invite the sunlight, the warmth, and the soft breeze, carrying away the lingering sense of confinement and struggle. The cottages felt new, not as if built from scratch, but as if reborn in place. Evenings became a time for reflection rather than survival. Around the restored hearths, families shared stories not of panic or hunger, but of perseverance and endurance. They spoke of the animals that had passed, the neighbors lost, and the lessons the frost had imparted. Lysa told her own version of the tales Mara had recounted, embellishing them with humor and bravery, turning fear into myth, turning the memory of cold into narrative warmth. Mara herself took a quiet moment in the sunlit yard. Seated on a worn wooden bench, she watched Lysa chase a chicken along the first patch of dry, forgiving earth. Tomas repaired a fence, pausing now and then to wipe sweat from his brow, smiling faintly at the freedom of movement. The rest of the village moved in a rhythm that was neither hurried nor lethargic, a rhythm attuned to the returning light and warmth, a rhythm of life itself. The land, once rigid and indifferent, now bore witness to resilience. Each green shoot, each trickling stream, each bird returning to its song, was a mark of continuity. Mara felt a profound gratitude, a quiet reverence for the entrance of her people, and the unyielding cycle of the seasons. Winter had tested them, shaped them, and, in its departure, left them alive, wary, and wiser as the sun dipped low over the thawed horizon. The village gathered near the hearth for a final, unspoken communion. No words were necessary. The warmth from the fire mingled with the warmth of bodies, of life reclaimed, of survival recognized. Morose eyes swept over the faces, children flushed with excitement and health, adults tired but upright, animals dozing contentedly in sunlit straw. The Frost Keeper had passed once more, leaving behind a village marked by both memory and renewal. Winter's grip had loosened. The land had awakened, and life fragile, persistent, and triumphant continued. Mara breathed deeply, savoring the moment, the sunlight on her face, the sounds of renewal. She whispered softly, not to anyone in particular, yet as if addressing all the world. The frost has gone. We endure, and the land lives again. And for the first time in many months, she felt it fully. Peace,